Hi, I'm Ashley Hammond.
And I'm Locke Hammond.
We're married.
We run a business together.
And we homeschool our 4 kids.
That makes us sound a little crazy.
I think people might think we're a little crazy.
Well, through all that crazy, we're here to help you blaze your own trail through a world designed for conformity.
And break the chains holding you back from living an uncommon life.
This is Trailblazers and Chainbreakers. Now you're just messing with me. Let's start this. Stop messing with me.
Alrighty.
All right. We're talking about, I think this is going to go a lot of different directions today. Let's just start off with the quote and we'll see where it takes us. I think we're going to talk, obviously, relationships. We're going to talk parenting. I don't know where else it goes, but here's the quote. You want me to read it?
Yeah.
Okay. Healthy relationships thrive when we understand how we affect each other, regardless of what we intended.
Equals life.
Equals life. Yeah. I think it applies to, all kinds of different areas. Where does your mind go first when I read that to you?
It went to us. I just think about so many times where, I didn't realize this in the past, but even in our new house, which we've only lived in for 3.5 years, of situations where we had gone into a fight and it was just not intended to be a fight. It was just one of us taking the other person in the wrong way or thinking something that had nothing to do with what was being said. And just assuming. Assumption comes into this, assuming that, which is interesting. Assuming that your partner is attacking you or after you when in reality, you guys are a team. I think happens a lot is you assume that your partner is out to get you.
Yeah.
And that's just not true.
Well, it's interesting as you're saying that, I agree with everything you said, but as you're saying that, I'm jumping around a little bit because I think where I would want to start is you and I talk about this idea of your relationship is 100% your responsibility a lot. And I think this is a great example because there's all kinds of defensiveness that comes into play. And you're just talking about this a little bit or leading into this. There's the history of how the relationship has been in the past. There's conditioning or maybe trauma in the past around certain topics. And I think all of these come into play we're talking specifically relationships, marriage, whatever it is. I think these are all stacked against you, but the answer ultimately comes back to taking 100% responsibility for the relationship. And so the quote says, healthy relationships thrive when we understand this and understanding that if I came in to a situation, maybe trying to offer correction or maybe something completely random thought, but you got defensive, understanding that you're getting defensive, being able to recognize that, take responsibility, 100% responsibility for the relationship and say, well, it doesn't matter how I intended that comment to land. What matters is how it did land. And so now I have to either clarify or backpedal or not get defensive right back. Right. One part of our relationship, as you're talking about the fights in this or arguments in this house, a lot of them are because we took something the way that it wasn't intended. But I think a lot of that specific action comes down to the history of our relationship. Yeah. So if the past 6 years it's gone this way 90% of the time, why wouldn't I assume that that's what's coming next kind of situation? So I might as well get defensive ahead of time. I might as well try and get out in front of this because the other person's 90% of the time in the past was attacking me in this situation. Yeah. So you got the history of the relationship, you got ingrained defensiveness. I'm very easy. It's very easy for me to get defensive. And you said something about this earlier, feeling like you have to prove your intelligence or something. So that was an issue for us sometimes where you felt not through anything I did, but you felt like you had to prove that you were as smart, that you could keep up. And that's almost a form of defensiveness that would come out in various different ways and kind of cause some issues. So I think my mind immediately went to both with the quote and as you were talking about some of our recent kind of arguments is 100% responsibility for your relationship. And this is the way to do it, is to understand that my actions might affect you differently than I wanted them to be. And while that's not my fault necessarily, in some ways it can be, maybe we'll talk about that at some point, but even if it's not my fault, it's my responsibility to fix that situation. And we're not going to fix that situation, by the way, by getting into an argument over what was intended. We need to change the way we're acting, right?
Yeah. I also thought of a couple of stories that I saw or heard that had nothing to do with us, but it made me think of this, where the intention was not to do harm, but there was harm done. I was watching something, I think it was on Instagram. It was like a reel that a woman did, and she talked about how important it was that the family had dinner together every night. She was a stay-at-home mom. Her husband worked a job out of the home, and her husband was like really late to come home, and he hadn't called or texted or anything. And she like felt herself getting really angry because it's like, we have a pact in this family, like you're home for dinner and you're not home, like you're late and you haven't called or texted me. And she found herself getting really angry, but in the midst of herself getting angry, she said, the outcome of this can go two ways. I can be like, pick at my husband as soon as he comes home and be like, where were you? Like, you're supposed to be home for dinner. Or I can show up with love and grace and be like, hey, honey, like, what happened? And like, what happened was the husband actually had a really terrible day. A bunch of stuff happened at the office. A lot of things went wrong. But if she had showed up for him really poorly when he got home, that was guaranteed to be a fight because he had a bad day at work, a long bad day, and like she was annoyed about the whole dinner thing. But instead she showed up in a loving way, and they ended up having a really good dinner regardless of the day that he had.
Yeah.
So it's like her perception was like, he's late on purpose. Like, he doesn't care. Like, he's late, he doesn't care. All these stories that she was telling herself, when in reality that wasn't true.
Yeah. Yeah. I can think of a couple situations like that we've had. Like, where have you been? We don't really understand. And actually, that's something that I know that I've worked on, and I think you have done a good job changing as well, is like that grace, that kindness, whether it's a phone call saying, hey, where are you? Or waiting until whoever it is gets home to say, like, what happened, delivering that differently. I think we worked on that, because that could have been a story from our past. Because
in reality, like, I know for myself, you like it. Like, you don't expect me to text you a lot when I'm gone. I am really bad with the phone while I'm not home, and you'll text me like, and you just want a response back. And I've been really bad, but it's not because of like intentionally being like, well, I'm not going to respond to Locke and I'm just ignoring him. I'm just like super into whatever I'm doing, and I'm not like, I should text you back, but in the same response, like, you shouldn't come at me like, why didn't you text me back, or like angry when I get home. Like, it's not, my intentions aren't to make you mad or because I don't care.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's one thing that we have a couple stories I think that we can share about this, but I wanted to kind of highlight this idea that perspective is greater than reality. But I wanted to do it with like a caveat, with like a but, because I think that anytime we make kind of statements like this, it's really easy for people to reject them out of hand and be like, well, yeah, if that's true, then this will happen. Right? Like, if I take 100% responsibility, this is the one I always get about taking 100% responsibility for your relationship. If I take 100% responsibility for my relationship, then my spouse is just going to be able to sit on their ass all day and do nothing. It's like, no, you've completely missed the point.
Yeah.
That's not what that means. Drop your expectations is another one I get kickback on. It's like, drop your expectations of your wife. It's like, well, if I don't have any expectations, like, she's just going to be useless. It's like, no, drop your expectations, not your standards. There's a difference, right? So the pushback on this is, if we say perspective is greater than reality, the pushback is like, well, this is the buzzword of the past 5 years, this idea of gaslighting, right? Like, oh, well, I feel it could go both ways, I guess. I feel like you're doing this to me, and making someone who's sharing their experience, like whether it's health wise or with the way that you're treating them, making them feel like they're crazy for feeling that way, is kind of how I interpret this idea of gaslighting. It doesn't mean, this idea that perspective is greater than reality doesn't mean that you're giving your spouse permission to give you crap about the way that you handle things, and that you just have to take it because it's their perspective. Like, they could be completely unhinged and you have to just take their perspective. It's like, no, that's not true. And the flip side is also not true. If you feel like that your perspective on something was a certain way and your spouse is giving you crap saying that that's the most ridiculous thing, like, how could you think that? Like, that's also not okay. There is some nuance here, right? But if this is the person, I'm looking at it from like the male perspective. So if I say it that way, that's why. So like, if this is the woman you're committed to, then you need to, no matter how ridiculous you think her perspective is in this situation, you need to take responsibility for it. That doesn't mean that you're necessarily wrong. What it means is, like, how can you handle it better next time? The texting thing is perfect. So like, in the past, I'll send you a text message, like, I don't even know an example, but like, I'll send you a text message when you're out. I know you're not going to get to it. You're out for, a couple hours. I know you're not getting to it anytime soon, but at some point, like 2 hours later, 3 hours later, I don't really care. If you're away, like before the day ends, I kind of want a response back, or I start to worry, right? You don't need to say, oh, well, that's totally understandable. Oh my God, I have to stop what I'm doing every 30 minutes and check my phone. It's like, no, you just, when you see it, respond back, right? There's that, finding that nuance, finding that line in between. It's not necessarily going to one extreme or the other. And so if you feel pushback when you hear that idea that perspective is greater than reality, then sit with that, examine that for a minute, and try and understand why. But it also doesn't mean that you're going to get taken advantage of in this situation.
Yeah.
Okay. You got any stories about this? You want me to give a story?
You can give a story.
Okay. So this happened recently with our daughter, and I've been doing a father-daughter journal with her, where like we answer questions or we write things or whatever it is, and we kind of pass it back and forth each day. And she can read my answers and then respond, and I can read her answers and then respond. But she came and she explained that, like, when I had done this before, we've done this before. You've done one with her. I did one with our son. And I feel like I'm, I don't want to say I'm busy as an excuse, but like getting caught up in the things that I feel like I need to do. There are days where I don't respond back to her or him until a day or two later. And I kind of get behind in the journal. And she came and she explained, like, when that happened, she feels like she's not important to me when I don't get to it the day that she leaves it behind. And my initial reaction to that, when actually she came to you and was having a conversation with you, and my initial reaction was to get really defensive and to say, like, well, the reality is I've been making it a point to not miss more than one day at a time. Like, if that thing sits on my desk and needs a response, it's sitting for a day and I'm getting to it the next day. And reality to me was, well, that perspective is completely wrong. Like, it's not, you are important to me. I'm getting to it way faster than I have in the past. But her perspective doesn't really understand that. And she doesn't need to. To her, it's making her feel a certain way. She feels what she feels. She's supposed to be feeling that. That's why she's feeling it. So me explaining or lecturing or correcting her and saying, you really should change how you feel, basically, because I'm doing it as quick as I could. That would actually shame her, and it would invalidate her feelings and basically tell her what she's feeling is wrong. So taking 100% responsibility for that means I need to, when I see that sitting on my desk, because that's where she leaves it for me to work on it, I need to make sure that I take 5 minutes to do it, even if it's at the end of a long day and I don't really want to. It's important to her. It needs to get done.
And I think with feelings, and she's really actually good at doing this, with feelings, it's really easy for you to be like, well, you shouldn't feel this, or like, I didn't mean that, so you should feel this way. And she does a really good job of being like, well, this is the way I feel. Like, I'm not saying this is what you do. This is how I'm feeling, and you can't take away from how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And you can't take away from the way anyone's feeling, even if the intention was something different coming from your end. Like, you can't make somebody else feel differently than what they feel. And it just kind of invalidates, like what you said, it kind of invalidates what they're feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, like, my kind of rephrasing of this quote that we started with, healthy relationships thrive when we understand how we affect each other, regardless of what we intended. My rephrasing of that as like a a girl dad kind of statement. I think a lot of dads, if you're like me, I don't understand my daughters, and I don't know that I ever will. But if I could turn this into, if I could rephrase this quote and turn it into like a hack or a rule or a statement about being a dad to my daughters, it's that my relationship with that daughter will thrive if I can just understand her perception and value it highly enough to honor it, to make changes. If something's bothering her, even though it's not what I intended, to address that. Our relationship's going to thrive if I can do that. She's going to feel important enough to her dad if I can do that.
Absolutely.
Okay. We kind of talked about marriage a little bit, but you have a story you want to share, or can we jump into the next thing?
We can jump into the next thing.
Okay. I want to kind of transition this into a little bit of like, how the heck do we do this better? We kind of been talking, explaining it. Let's get down to like practical things that we can kind of implement. And in thinking through, like specifically in our marriage, thinking through this, we came across, and we might have mentioned this earlier, but like the importance of tone was one of the things. And I was thinking about like how many fights you and I have gotten into because someone's, and I said that kind of implying you, I didn't mean you at all. One of our perception was different than the other's intention. It happens both ways, right? But like the perfect example for me is correction. So you and I both screw stuff up with our kids, with each other. When you look at our relationship, the vision that you and I have for our relationship is one that I think probably most people would share in this aspect of it. At least you and I, our vision is that we can go to each other and we can say, hey, I saw what you did over there, and I like this part, but I think this thing that you did probably isn't the best way to do it. Mm-hmm. And kind of lovingly correct each other. And it's obviously intended to help, but I think this idea that we need to help each other correct is really important, because we don't have the outside perspective. We're so stuck in our head most of the time. And there are so many fights that we've had where we've tried to correct each other, and it really was intended to help, but it was perceived differently, very differently. It was perceived as an attack, or one of us got defensive out of instinct, and that was perceived by the original person who brought it up as an attack right back. And I think that this brings us to like the idea of, we're looking to make this practical, the idea of tone and body language and how important that is. And like there are so many fights we've gotten in where it was purely tone or purely body language. Yeah,
the tone and the way that you say it, I think, are huge. So like, say your partner isn't talking to you nicely, matching that, like matching their tone. I find we did this a lot. Like, you'll be talking really rudely to me, and I'll be like, well, why are you talking to me like that? It's like the same way you're talking to me. And like it can be phrased and brought about very differently than that. Or if you're like, one of the parents are not parenting very good and talking to the children not right, or do something, instead of like calling them out in front of the child, which is never, that's just never good. And also like the way that you say it, like, why are you treating them like that? Yeah. Like taking them aside and being like, hey, like, I noticed, like, are you okay? I noticed that you're getting a little frustrated or a little short with so-and-so. Which, you know, we could get better at definitely not doing it in front of the children. Yeah. Because they don't need to see that. And also it kind of looks like you're not a team anymore. Like you're going against each other. Yeah. I mean, that's from the perspective of the kids. I guess you could make the argument both ways, because I think that it's okay for kids to see you disagree as a partnership, because, or at least accept correction, since we're using that term, because it's modeling the same for them. It's, if you can do it in the right way, like we're kind of talking about here, then it's actually setting the right model for them. If you do it in the wrong way, then it's absolutely not good for it to happen in front of the kids. And from my perspective, when you offer that correction in front of the kids, that was one thing that I had to work really hard at accepting, because the old me, the original thought process, which is clearly not a healthy one, is, oh, you're challenging my authority in front of the kids.
And it's like, well, obviously that's very focused on me and my ego and authority and in air quotes. So I think that correction, doing it the right way, if your partner doesn't receive it well in front of other people, that's something to be aware of. Back to the original quote, like that's something we need to know, something we need to prepare for, and finding ways around that. Like I did not receive it well in front of the kids. It felt like you were jumping in on their side. I was already in a battle with them, right? Like a metaphorical war. And if you came in and defended them, it felt like you were attacking me. But that was my conditioning. That was my baggage. But you had to work around that. So you had to like try different ways of getting my attention, like pulling me aside, like saying, okay, I'll handle it, like nicely kicking me out. I think of that as like a soft exit, like a way to allow me to exit without losing face in that heated moment of like, if I'm so worked up that I'm not handling something properly, instead of coming in and saying, well, my intention was to get him to get out of the situation. He perceived it differently. Like that's not taking responsibility. Coming in a way that is going to help me perceive it in the way that you intend it is the way to do it. And so sometimes for some people, I was one of them, you had to come in intelligently. I don't want to say carefully, but intelligently, and how you kind of offered correction if it was in the middle of a moment. And I think that's okay. It's obviously not ideal.
Yeah.
But it's okay. Like there's nothing wrong with you. You just need to work on that. And the idea around this is how much better is your relationship going to be if you can do that in the right way for your spouse? How much better is your parenting going to be if you can accept that from your spouse and also do it in the right way for your spouse as well? It's just going to be better all around. And so I think that like valid point, like sometimes you need to not do it in front of the kids, and then other times if you can, like I also think it's important for them to see that, a healthy model of that.
Well, yeah, because they're learning relationships and how to be in a relationship, any kind of relationship or friendship, a partnership, anything through us, through what we do. Like that's what they're learning. I had something to say and my brain just went totally blank. Oh, I didn't realize, I mean, I heard this statistic, but I didn't realize how big tone was to me, and also body language. And I know it's really big for our kids because there's constant saying, well, like you looked mad.
Yeah.
Or like you were doing a certain thing this way. And so like, I just thought you were mad. But for me and you too, there's many times where like, I know you, so I know when you're angry, and like I can tell, and just by looking at you. And so I think that body language and tone are huge, and I didn't realize how huge they were. Yeah.
So let me give you the statistics, and so like this is the first of our handful of how to do this better tips. There's a doctor by the name of Albert Morabian, and he had a model of communication, and he showed that if you break down what a person receives, right? So this is going right back to the point, how we affect each other regardless of what we intended. So this is looking at how the person receives the communication, that 55% of what they receive comes from facial expression and body language. 38% comes from tone of voice, and 7% comes from words. So only 7% of what somebody is receiving in terms of what you're saying comes from the actual words, which is like mind-boggling, because that's the source of all of these, but that's not what I said kind of arguments, right? That means 93% of what I receive from you is body language and tone, and only 7% is the actual words. Like you think you know what you're saying. We spend all this time, at least I do, like I spend a lot of time figuring out how I want to say certain things, because I know that if I say it the wrong way, it's going to be received well, is kind of like how we've been conditioned, right?
Yeah.
It's if I screw up the way I deliver it, if I screw up the words that I use, it's not going to go well. So we spend all this time like thinking about how to say this. And how many of us spend even 3 seconds thinking about our body language, our facial expression, and our tone? But that's 93% of what the people receive.
Yeah. And if you think about it, like how many situations did you jump to like a million different conclusions just from the way somebody looked?
Yeah.
Like, honestly, though, like, you think about, like, as a child, like, as your parent in your relationship, like, just by the way that they were standing, just by the way that their face was, just by the way that their energy was, like, how many conclusions can you jump to before the words even come out of their mouth?
Yeah.
Like, so many instances where I can remember where I was, like, automatically going into a situation before words were even met, like, this is going to be a fight, just because of the way it's presented from both sides, like our energy and our body language.
Yeah. I'm thinking of a couple times where like either you walk in the room or I walk in the room and I can just tell like, oh crap, here we go.
Yeah.
But no words have been spoken yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think about for a child too, like a child who is clearly shorter, like smaller, and we're like these big monsters that like what conclusions they come to and the stories that they tell themselves just from our tone and our body language.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. What else you got in terms of the solution? Like, how do we do this better? What would you suggest? How do we look at this relationship between perception and reality better?
This is not just something that you just do overnight. It's a practice. There's many, many books on it. I've read a couple about this, but it's listen to understand, not to be understood. Mm-hmm. I think so many of us are very ego driven and we just want to be understood within reason for a lot of reason for whatever happened in our childhood, whatever happened in our life. Like we just want to be understood. Nobody understands us. And I can relate with this a lot. And at some point in your life, when you're maturing emotionally, you got to take yourself out of this, especially in a relationship, and seek more to understand where your partner or your friend or your child is coming from instead of trying to be understood in that situation. And I have to say this to myself over and over again, Ashley, it is not about you. Like, this is not about you, actually, this more with the children. It's not about you. Like, It's just not about you. It's about them, and it's about their emotions and their growing brains and all of this thing, and take myself out of the equation. And that's really, really hard for, I think, everyone, because we're very ego driven. Everything is about us. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's an important question to ask, like, what's the outcome that I want out of this conversation?
Yeah.
What's more important? Me getting my turn to talk, or actually coming to a resolution here? You know, it depends on obviously the situation, but like, let's say I'm trying to offer correction to you and I start to say, hey, I don't think you'd like, why are we doing this way? Why do we have this rule? And we've had like, this is almost, I can't think of a specific example, but I'm sure this has happened so many times. Like, hey, Ashley, I don't think we need this rule. Like, why are we enforcing this rule? You get defensive and, in fact, like not even letting me finish what I'm trying to say. So immediately I'm triggered, right? Like my baggage is popping up. Like you said, like, I feel like I wasn't ever listened to as a kid. Like that little kid's jumping out, trying to cut you off back and like return the favor and say, no, it's my turn. I'm trying to offer you correction. You're getting defensive. I'm getting defensive because you're cutting me off. Neither of us is listening to what the other person is saying. What's the desired outcome? Do I just want to dump all of what I'm thinking on you, or do what I actually want, like a resolution to figure out what we're doing about this rule, how we can handle it better? And I think that's an important question for me. I like the way you said it. Like, it's not about you. It's about them. It's about their emotions with the kids, at least. For me, I like focusing questions, and that is a focusing question for me. Like, what's more important, me getting my turn to talk, or actually like turning my talking brain off for a second and listening to what Ashley has to say, or listening to what our kids have to say? You ever, like, you're looking at me, I know you know this, Ashley, but like, think about your kids and how many times they just ramble on and on and on and on. And it's like, you could just tune that out and wait for them to stop talking, or you could actually listen to understand, to your point.
And I think with that too, especially just being a woman, so I'm going to gear towards women, and we have 3 girls. Girls indeed talk more than men. Like Locke has a statistic on that. I don't remember what it is, but
it's on average, the average woman speaks 20,000 words a day. The average man will speak 7,000 words a day. And so my math is, I have 4 women in the house. I'm outnumbered 80,000 to 7,000.
With that being said, most of the time with people in general, actually, I don't think this is just girls, but I'm just referring to girls because there's so many girls in this house. we actually, from talking, can resolve our own problems. We just need to be heard. So like if we're talking and we're going on and on and on, we can resolve our own problems if you just let us resolve our own problems. So, I mean, I know that's kind of off topic, but I mean, that's what I went to with that. And I was just thinking about the girls, like sometimes they'll be complaining and they'll go on and on about a million different things and all of these things. But I've seen from my own eyes, and sometimes it takes a really long time, them resolve their own problems.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You've heard me say this before, but like sometimes just listening is the solution.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. I'm going to segue yours, this idea of listening to understand, and into my next one. The question I asked you about listening to understand is like, what's more important? This next one comes with a question too. And it's this idea, this phrase that I've used for a while that has been really impactful to me. The idea, I love you more than I need to be right. So, right. And so it goes back to the same kind of questioning. What's more important here in this situation? It's starting to spiral out of control, like whether it's with the kids or you or whoever. They're not picking up what I was putting down. Mm-hmm. They're not taking it the way I thought that I was giving it. And what's more important? Me correcting them and saying, no, you're not listening. No, you don't get what I'm trying to say. Stop talking. Let me talk. Let me fix this. Is it more important for me to prove I'm right? Or is it more important for me to just kind of turn into the love that I have, whether it's you or the kids, and say, okay, I'm going to be more curious about their perception. How did they take it? Why did they take it that way? And get curious about that. Or do I care more about being right?
I love how you said curious. I think that goes with listen to understand and not be understood is something you can remind yourself, get curious what the other person is thinking and where they're coming from. And I think that's just a really good way to describe that. Like, being curious, like being a curious person. Like for me, it was really hard. It was very hard for me to see a different perception than my own. And I know that a lot of people can relate to that, but you and I, we think alike for most things. Like we have the same like standards for the most part. We have the same values. And yet our brains are very, very different. I can look at a box and you can look at a box and you'll see the box completely different than the way I see the box. It's just the way our brains are just very different. Mm-hmm. And it was very hard for me in fights or anything to not look at it, but the way that I was seeing it through my lens. And my lens isn't always the greatest lens. I can see things very negatively and go to like worst case scenario instead of like the benefit of the doubt type thing. And when I started to be able to get curious with where you are coming from and try to give you the benefit of the doubt and get out of my head, because what my head would do was just shut down right away. Like I wouldn't even like think of or entertain anything else but what my brain was thinking. And when I started to be able to entertain something besides my own perspective, then it was a game changer for me because I wasn't just living in the way that I was thinking, like black or white thinking, like in my box. Yeah. I was able to step outside of my box and be like, oh, wow, there's more ways to see this. And what was big for me, and this isn't like in a relationship, but looking at anything, I would see something. Okay, for instance, I took my me time on a certain day and it needed to change. A few different times it needed to change, but I took it a certain day for like a year. The same time, same day. We needed to change it for whatever reason. I totally shut down and was like, it's over. I'm not going to get me time anymore. The world is ending. And Locke was like, well, why not, Ashley? Like, I didn't even entertain that there could be a different possibility, a different day, a different time that could work. I just completely shut down. And this is what I did a lot in our relationship as well. Like, if things happen that didn't go as planned, or you said things that I didn't like, then I would just shut down and not even entertain that there could be another possible way of thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking through, like, I know we jumped ahead to my next one, but if we can go back for a second to listening to understand, as you're talking through this, here's something, the realization I've had is like when we're building new habits, you can't get rid of a bad habit without replacing it with a new habit, right? So like me sitting here listening to you kind of thinking, when's she going to be done? I want my turn. Not listening to understand, that's a bad habit. And so the best way to get rid of that, instead of just saying stop doing it, is to actually give you what to do instead. So this is something that you and I should get better at, should keep practicing. But this 3-step process, I've heard it explained by a number of different people, so I don't know exactly who this came from first, but 3 steps on how to actually listen to understand and make the other person feel understood as well. Okay, and that's almost just as important as listening to understand, is making sure that the other person feels like they're being listened to. So the first step is to ask a question, basically to just get the conversation started, like any kind of question, like, do you think we could have handled this situation better? Whatever it is, right? The second step is to repeat back in your own words what their answer to the question was. So what I hear you saying is blah, 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 right? Not word for word, not like you're a kid repeating back everything somebody says, being annoying, but using your own words. And the third step, which the last time I heard somebody explain this, he was saying this is what most people miss, but the third step is confirming with the person that that's actually what they were trying to say. So if I ask you a question and you give me an answer, and then I repeat it back to you, I say, so what you're saying is blah, blah, blah. And then the third step is asking, did I get that right?
Yeah.
Is that right? And I think when you're focused on that framework, as simple as it is, it takes you out of your own head on what you want to say next, because you've got these 3 steps to go follow before you even get a turn to really talk anyway, so you can actually be more present. So throw that in there, and then kind of slightly out of order, but what else do you have on your list for how to do this better?
I don't have anything else.
You don't have anything else?
No.
Okay. I'll give you one. This is one that I try and talk about as much as possible, because I think that I really needed this. I wish I had learned how to do this earlier, but the idea of learning how to apologize. So we're all going to screw up a lot. And if we take this quote and elaborate on it as we did today, there's a lot of situations where we don't even screw up, but it's perceived wrong, right? Maybe we haven't done anything wrong. Maybe our tone or our facial expression isn't perfect, but sometimes it's not even that, and it's just perceived wrong. It's just defensiveness, or it's conditioning, or the history of the relationship. But learning how to apologize and what you're apologizing for, which is part of learning how to apologize, I think is really important, because me coming to you and saying, I'm sorry that you took what I said this way, is not me saying that I was completely out of line, that I delivered it horribly, whatever. It's just back to 100% accountability, 100% responsibility. It's stating the truth. Like, I am sorry that you took it this way. It's not saying that I screwed up. It's not saying that you screwed up by taking it that way, but it's opening a door. We talked about a soft exit when we were talking about correction in front of the kids, right? It's opening up a door, a soft kind of exit, a soft door to continuing the conversation, to saying, listen, I didn't mean for it to come off this way. But if you and I are disagreeing and I say, yeah, but Ashley, this is not how I meant for you to take it. That is, in my experience, in our experience, that's not going to calm the situation down. It might just make it worse, depending on how we deliver it and all that. But if I come and I say, I'm sorry you took it that way, and I mean it, I'm not just placating you, I'm not blowing smoke at you, that's different. It's not a lie. You're not lying because you are sorry she took it that way. It's not admitting you did anything wrong, but it's a much softer way to say it. And sometimes there are times where we actually do screw it up. Like, yeah, I came in with a horrible tone of voice and I'm really sorry. Like, that was not how I should have delivered it. What I should have done was, and then deliver it better.
Yeah.
That, for me at least, has been huge. With the kids, I had to do this morning with one of our girls. We're doing schoolwork and I got frustrated because, well, it doesn't even matter why. I got frustrated. My tone of voice was out of line. What I was saying was totally accurate, but my tone of voice was terrible. The
delivery of it.
And she got frustrated and walked away and started telling this story in her head. It was about math. Started telling this story in her head about how she's horrible at math. And luckily, I fairly quickly realized what I had done. I went over, I gave her a hug, I apologized, I had a conversation with her. And she shared with me that that's how she was feeling, that she felt behind, that she felt like she was horrible at math. And I was like, that's so far off of reality, right? This is the theme for today. That's so far off of reality. It's not true. She's not behind. She's not horrible at math. She's actually very good at math. But my tone of voice, A, was making her feel that way. And I had to own that and I had to apologize for that. And B, to the point of this quote about healthy relationships thrive when we understand how we affect each other, regardless of what we intended, realizing that, her perception was that, even if her perception is wrong, which it is, I still need to respect that. And I can't just say, no, that's ridiculous. And that's not true. Here's why it's not true. Eventually we got to that. Here's why it's not true. But we had to start with honoring that, listening to understand, like you said, apologizing and saying, okay, well, how does that make you feel? Like, why do you think that? How about this? And kind of work our way there and let her talk and kind of vent for a little while.
Yeah. And I think with that being said, also, you're not always going to, always, my favorite word, you're not always going to show up perfectly, nor should you have to. Like, there's going to be times where the tone is not good, the body language is not good. And that's not a reason to be like, yeah, we have these standards for each other. And also we live in life and we live in world and we're not perfect. And we can't hold each other to this expectation that constantly we're going to show up throughout this messy life perfectly all the time. And yet it doesn't give us permission, because our partner's not showing up perfectly every day, to get angry or get mad. Like, I don't always need an apology. Like, sometimes you're not going to treat me the way I want to be treated 100% of the time. And I don't always need you to apologize to me or explain why you did what you did. Like, sometimes it just happens. And if the norm more than not is that you treat me good and you talk to me nicely with respect and we handle ourselves well, okay. And then the small percentage is sometimes you don't, like, that's the way it is.
Yeah. True.
I think sometimes people in this work of like working on yourself and becoming better like to get very nitpicky on certain things. And I absolutely do believe in standards. And also, I also believe that there's no way that you're showing up perfectly. So why should you expect that of your partner?
Yeah. I mean, that's very true. It basically, you just hit on my last point, my last suggestion for how to do this better. And it's this idea of grace or forgiveness, if that's what you want to call it, and patience. And understanding that you can come into a situation with perfectly good intentions and I can perceive it the opposite. And I need to give you grace and patience in the fact that I don't think you handled it well, or I don't think you came into it, and vice versa, right? Like, you can come in with great intentions. Like, why can't he just hear the point? But he got defensive because of such and such and whatever. Grace and forgiveness and patience needs to be extended to me as well. Yeah. Both sides. And I think that's the perfect way to end it. Like, ultimately what it comes down to is remembering that you guys are on the same team.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of this quote that I'm not going to remember perfectly, and I don't remember who said it, but the idea is basically there's nothing in this world that can end your relationship as long as you guys are willing to stop fighting against each other and start fighting for each other. And to do that requires patience and forgiveness and a little bit of grace when you think the other person is out of line.
I think that's a great way to end.
All right. That's all I got. That's all you got. That's all we got. I appreciate you guys coming with us on the journey this week.
Thanks, friends. Hi, friends. If you're enjoying the show, would you please leave a quick rating or review on Apple Podcasts for us? Doing this helps more people find the podcast, which means even more people can benefit from the conversations. We really appreciate you and your time, and thanks, as always, for listening.